it changed my life. And I know that can sound so cliche, but it's not hyperbole. It changed how I related to parenting. It changed how I related to all the thoughts in my head. It changed how I was as a teacher in the classroom. I laughed more, I smiled more, like life just became funnier and a bit easier.
Hi there, and welcome to Yoga Stories Project, straight from Delaware. I am Hunter Clark Fields coming at you, and I'm doing this podcast to inspire you to bring more yoga and mindfulness into your life. Who am I? I'm a mindfulness mama mentor. I help smart, accomplished, amazing people bring more mindfulness into their lives, especially in times where they're struggling. And today I'm excited because I have for you an amazing guest. You are going to love this person I'm talking to. It is Sarah Rudell Beach, and she is none other than Oprah's anointed mindfulness guru, the blogger at Left Brain Buddha. And I could have just talked to her for hours, geeking out about mindfulness. It's amazing. So I know you're going to really love this episode. But before we get into it, I want to thank you, dear listener. Thank you so much for listening and being part of this. And if you want to support this podcast, this best way to do it is, one great way to do it anyway, is to leave an iTunes review, leave an honest review, tell us if you like the podcast. And another great way to support the podcast is to tell a friend. Share the podcast with someone else. If you benefited, share it. Tell us how it's going. Oh, and if you leave an iTunes review, by the way, and you want to let me know at hunter@hunteryoga.com, just send me a copy of your review. I will send you personally a handwritten thank you note. You can just send me your address, and I would be so pleased to do that and connect with you in person. Before we dive in, I want to let you know that when this podcast comes out, it is the end of the summer in August. And coming up real soon, I'm going to be doing a new mindfulness challenge for parents. It's a free 10-day challenge to help parents build their own mindfulness practice. And you will be able to find that at hunteryoga.com/challenge. And you can sign up there. So I hope you do. If you have listened to these podcasts, you know what an incredible impact mindfulness can make on your life. So I hope that you will go to hunteryoga.com/challenge and sign up for the free mindfulness challenge. And that'll be before the mindful parenting course starts up. It's all happening. I'm so excited. I can't believe it. But that's it. I know you're really going to love this episode, so let's just dive right in. Hi, Hunter here, and welcome to Yoga Stories Project. I'm really happy today to talk to a colleague, a person who's doing other great, amazing work in this world with mindfulness, and I'm talking about Sarah Rudell Beach, and she is a teacher, a writer, and mother to two little ones, and she's the creator of an incredibly popular blog about mindfulness, Left Brain Buddha, and so that's where she explores ideas and practices for mindfulness and shares the challenges and the riches in her journey to live and parent more mindfully in a left brain analytical life. And she's also the executive director of Brilliant Mindfulness, LLC. And in her free time, she reads and practices yoga and dancing and hanging out with her two little Buddhas. So welcome to Yoga Stories Project, Sarah.
Thank you, Hunter. I am super excited to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm such a big admirer of your work and your writing and the way you share about mindfulness in such a really accessible way. It's really, really wonderful. And I encourage everyone to absolutely check it out. And so what happened? What led you to mindfulness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's so funny. I think, I don't know if I should say funny, but, interesting. I think most of the people that I talk with that come to mindfulness came to mindfulness kind of in a time of crisis, in a time when they really were needing help in their life. And that's certainly true for me. So my children, my oldest is now almost 10. So it's been almost a 10-year journey now, because it was right after I had children that my life went from being like something that I felt very in control of, and I felt very competent in what I did. And then, you have these two little creatures that just upend all of that. And so that was just a huge adjustment. And I, especially after the birth of my son, my second child, really was struggling then with postpartum depression. And for quite some time, I just tried to kind of steal my way through it. And well, I'm still getting up and going to work every day. So clearly things aren't that bad. Like, I can get through this. And I finally, with help from my mother and my husband, realized that I couldn't. So I reached out and got help, and which was hard, but admitting I needed help. And one of the things that was recommended to me was to practice mindfulness. And again, this would have been, 7 years ago now. And so it wasn't everywhere. And I was like, that just sounds weird. And I don't have time to be mindful because I'm a mom and I've got a full-time job and I have to go to Target tonight. So like, I don't have time to be mindful. But I wanted to get better, and I wanted to do everything I could. And so I started practicing and kept practicing and kept practicing. And it was amazing. It changed my life. And I know that can sound so cliche, but it's not hyperbole. It changed how I related to parenting. It changed how I related to all the thoughts in my head. It changed how I was as a teacher in the classroom. I laughed more, I smiled more, like life just became funnier and a bit easier. And not because the stress wasn't there. It's just, I could completely shift how I related to all of it. And it was so powerful. And so that's why a few years later, I started the blog and then started teaching mindfulness. I connected with some organizations, especially Mindful Schools out in California, that works on bringing mindfulness into the classroom, because I was seeing my students were so stressed and my colleagues were so stressed. And it was kind of like this, like, oh my gosh, I know this thing that's so helpful. And why aren't more of us doing it? And so that's kind of the short story, now made a little bit longer, of how I got into mindfulness and then into doing this work, just seeing stressed out kids, stressed out colleagues, and knowing that, I knew something that had really helped me and changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And it's funny because as you say that, I can relate so much, because I had a very similar experience of feeling like, oh my God, this changed my life, where I had bits of depression, up and downs for sort of my whole life. And then, and then finally I sat at 27 years old. I was like, I'm finally going to sit. And it was like, after a few months, it was like, wow, like these dips of depression that I would get into every week or two, they disappeared from my life. They literally went away. Like I had them for 27 years and I don't have them anymore. I haven't for the last 11 years. And to me, it's nothing short of a miracle. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I can totally relate. So you had a very similar experience to this. So how did you fit in your mindfulness practice as you got started when you had kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was hard. I think it's hard, especially when they're so little. I had the chance to see Jon Kabat-Zinn speak when he was in Minneapolis several months ago, and someone asked a very similar question, like, oh my, I have two little kids. And he said, you know what, if you have 5 minutes a day to sit with little kids, that's awesome. And so I was like, oh my gosh, if Jon Kabat-Zinn is saying that, then it's okay. If when we have these little kids, we don't find all that time. So for me, I managed to carve out time in the morning. And it took a bit of kind of trial and error at first. I tried to do it when I got home from work and I was just too tired, or I tried to do it before bed and again was too tired. And so finally just committed to getting up a little bit earlier in the morning. And I love it because the house is totally quiet and it's just, there's just that kind of that preciousness and, almost sacred feel to the quiet house in the morning and your first cup of coffee and all of that. And just really carving that out as my time and my time to sit before having to get breakfast for the kids and then go to work and that. And so even starting with just 5-10 minutes, I always recommend that people just start with a really short amount of time because even 5 minutes, if we've never practiced before, can feel really long. And then finding where it's going to fit. I know some of the mothers that I work with, they do it during lunchtime at work, and they just, take 5 minutes of their lunch break and just lock the office door and they have 5 minutes, or they'll sit in their car before they drive home, from work. And so I think it's, we can always find those little pockets of time. And even if it's only 5-10 minutes, it can make such a big difference in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think being, going back to, what John Kabat-Zinn was saying, like just being really compassionate with ourselves, that if we are at this stage where our kids are so little, and if we close our eyes for 5 minutes, I mean, who knows what could happen, to just honor that. And you know what, I'm just going to be, as I'm rocking my child to get ready for nap, I'm just going to be very present with rocking my child, or as we're doing this puzzle, I'm going to be very present with putting this puzzle together. And, that can be our practice for a time, because at some points in our life, having the luxury of half an hour to just sit is just really not a possibility given our lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And certainly starting small, but I think it really is helpful. Sometimes I think about that, and like for some people ask, like, can I wash the dishes mindfully and things like that? And sometimes I think like, yes, you absolutely can. But I think it's also really helpful to have some kind of like formal practice that you are saying, I am dedicating the moments from this, even if it's just 2 minutes, like I'm dedicating these moments to, because it just creates such a different intention and feel. And it kind of resets sort of the feeling about the whole day, like some kind of formality. But it sounds like
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were able to do that, like with your small children, and you were working. Mm-hmm. And now it sounds like mindfulness was something that was new to you at that time. So I'm wondering, it probably wasn't in your everyday life and in your everyday culture. So how did you keep yourself motivated? Now I'm kind of guessing that you're a really achievement, I have a small inkling that you're, that you really do the things you set out to do, but still, like how did you stay motivated when you didn't want to?
Yeah. And I think that, it's funny too, they say it's 21 days to start a new habit, and research says it's actually about 66 days. So it can be hard when we're starting out. And for me, it was really remembering why I was doing it. Kind of, okay, what is my intention behind this? And okay, there's research behind this, and I know this could work, and I want to get better. And that was kind of the thing I would remind myself of. I mean, I think it's like any kind of habit. If we're going to exercise, it's like, we know what the goal is, and we know how we want to look and how we want to feel. And then those first couple weeks of going for a run in the morning just are miserable and we don't want to do it. But we kind of keep that intention in mind. And then eventually, like, the run becomes enjoyable. And I'm just really making this up because I am not a runner. Like, I choose to do other forms of exercise, but I'm assuming at some point running becomes enjoyable.
It does.
My husband runs every morning, so I'm just trusting that that's there. For me, it's dance and other things to exercise. But you just get to that point where, like, doing it in and of itself becomes the benefit. And for me with mindfulness, it didn't take that long for like, okay, like I at least have these 5 minutes of quiet, and I can guarantee that no matter what else is going to happen during my day, I had 5 minutes, and that's why I love doing it in the morning, because it's done. It's not like, oh gosh, when am I going to be mindful? And kind of that. It's like, okay, I've done this. I've already had a moment to myself today. When we kind of can say, hey, I haven't had a moment to myself. It's like, actually you did. And I would agree, I think with mothers of little kids, we're kind of walking that line of just having the time for it. But I would echo what you said about the formal practice. I mean, because I think that's really where the real important insights of the practice happen, is in the seated practice. I share the story a lot in the trainings that I do with teachers, and I kind of went through a phase, it was maybe like a year and a half ago, where like about, it was probably, I'm kind of the person who peaks at the timer too. And so it was probably at about like the 17-minute mark. And I would just start getting really restless in the morning. Like, okay, I need to get up. Like, this is just silly. And then, I would just sit with the restlessness. And then, a minute later, you're fine, and that little burst of restlessness, like every other little thought, has already passed. And, it's like, okay, yeah, this is good practice for sitting with things that are uncomfortable. And then, during that time, there was like, that same day, probably a day when that had happened in the morning, I was teaching and it was the end of the day. And I remember looking up at the clock and I had like 45 minutes left of class. And it was kind of that like, like I'm so tired. And I'm just going to assume other teachers have been there too. And I was like, okay. And it was like, oh, this is just like when I was sitting, and I hit that point where I was really restless and didn't want to do it anymore. And so I just stayed with it and noticed it. And then it went away. And kind of the same thing with teaching. Like, okay, yeah, right now I'm feeling really annoyed with teaching. And then just noticing that. And then like a minute later, a kid asked a question and then someone laughed and then things picked up. And then, it was fine. And the next 43 minutes of teaching were great. And, so I think it's in those moments on the cushion where we practice sitting with something that's uncomfortable or with whatever's coming up. And then when we get into real life, we're like, oh yeah, I've done this before. I know what to do. I've been with discomfort. I know what to do when irritation arises. I always say we practice when it's easy so we can do it when it's hard.
Yeah.
It's easy to be mindful on my cushion at 5 a.m. when no one's awake in the house. It's hard when it's 1:45 and I just want the teaching day to be over, or, my kids are going crazy, but it's like, because I've practiced, I know what to do.
Yeah. I love, I think Carla Naumburg said to me, there's no such thing as crisis meditation,
Yes.
Yes. Doesn't work that way. You have to train the mind to do it. And so what I'm kind of hearing what you're saying in there is like, it's going back to what you were saying about the restlessness on the cushion and the restlessness in the classroom. It points to this thing that makes us suffer, which is this thing that our brain does, right? Which believes that the way it is now is the way it's going to be forever.
Yes.
And
yes.
it's interesting because, impermanence is a sort of a mindset, is a concept in the world of mindfulness, but it's like, it just arises naturally. Like, oh, like this is going to pass. This too shall pass. It arises naturally, but it really is, it's something that our brains kind of naturally want to be like, oh, this is the way life is forever, and I will suffer through it, and it's funny how we don't even, I think it's hard to explain that, because until you know what it's like to be on the other side of that everything is permanent mindset, it's hard to explain what that is. Mm-hmm. How do you explain it?
Yeah, well, and I think, it's such a big concept. I mean, it's so, I think mindfulness is such an interesting field in general. It's like, it's simple but not easy. It's like these very simple things like, oh yes, everything's changing. I know that. And then like, no, do you actually know it and watch it? And can you be with it is on a whole different level. So yeah, I mean, I often the example I use, I love Brene Brown's phrase, foreboding joy, and how when something good happens, and it's like, we can't even enjoy that something good is happening because we're like, oh my gosh, but all these things could go wrong. And like, I just want to hold this forever. And we can't. And then we end up not feeling the happy because we're so worried about the happy ending or the happy, coming to an end. And so the way I kind of explain it is like, think about a time when you were happy and just enjoyed being happy. And then, yeah, that happiness ebbed and flows and then it went away. And then maybe some sadness came in. And then, people kind of get that on that kind of that intellectual level. But it's like, just notice that, when you're happy, do you know you're happy? And then when you're sad, do you know that you're sad? And then just sitting with it. What is it? Like, what is happy? Oh, well, it's excitement, and then it becomes contentment, and then that even happy is made up of all these different experiences. I heard one of my teachers tells the story of, and I don't know if it's a true story or not, but supposedly this man who's on a long meditation retreat, and he tells his teacher, like, I can't keep doing this meditation because I'm so frustrated with this person. Like, I hate this person. Like, I can't do loving kindness for this person. Like, I just hate this person. And the teacher says, okay, I want you to practice hate meditation. The guy's like, what? I want you to sit for an hour and I just want you to hate this person. Like, okay. And the point of the story is he sits down and starts to hate, and he realizes that he can't hate for an hour. He starts hating, and then he gets distracted by something else. And then he remembers maybe something funny this person said. And, oh no, I'm supposed to be hating, And so I think we all can kind of get that we're not going to be happy all the time, but it's like, if you're feeling miserable, just try, and I don't recommend as a practice, like hate meditation, but like, just try, like, can you sit and just be angry and try, like, no, even that shifts and changes.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just reading the book. You're going to get it on that intellectual level, but to just see like, oh, wow, I was really sad 2 minutes ago. And then something funny happened and I laughed. And then a little sad came back, that it's that constantly shifting emotional landscape that we start to just get a little bit more familiar with, and realizing that these emotions, in many ways, it's just a word that we've given to this combination of thoughts and physiological experiences that are happening in us. And can we just experience them on that level without getting so wrapped up in like, oh, I'm angry, or I'm anxious, and then just that word gives it such a whole different meaning.
Yeah. Like the whole story of it. And then that's what the thing is, like, you were saying, going back to like sitting with the discomfort of being, being in this state of whatever that state is. And it's interesting because I think part of a mindfulness practice is simply just, it's learning how to tolerate our own physiological sensations, like you're talking about, like thoughts and physiological sensations. Like I think we tend to live our lives like in this one spectrum, like that's this narrow spectrum that's comfortable, right? Whether it's whatever it is, it could be anxiety and stress and different things, but it's familiar and it's comfortable. And then mindfulness is asking us to sit and stay non-reactive and be curious and be aware and alert for even these things that are uncomfortable. And that it's funny because that often includes things that we think are really positive, like a deep sense of appreciation can be just as uncomfortable as anxiety or fear. It's really interesting to find these things. But and then there's that other point, like, that's the thing about this practice. It's not like listen to us and believe my word on it. It's like, go try it yourself and see what happens, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So cool. I could just, I could geek out with you on this.
I know. I'm like, let's talk neuroscience.
It's great. It's great. So, not to go deep down into the rabbit hole of it, but like, so sure. How did, you were a young parent and you said it changed your life, your practice, it affected your life. How do you think it, I mean, obviously you don't know anything different, but how do you think it affected your parenting?
Yeah. I mean, the way I can definitely see it affecting my parenting is just pausing. Finding space. I love that Viktor Frankl quote about, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And how for so many of us, there's no space between stimulus and response. I mean, something happens, boom, we react. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of that, part of that was from my training as a teacher. I mean, I remember being, I went straight from undergrad to teaching. And so I was super young. And I remember hearing, especially as a young female teacher, like, the second someone misbehaves, like, you need to be on that or they're going to be walking all over you. It's like, it was almost kind of like being conditioned to be very reactive in the classroom. And then that kind of, after teaching for 10 years and having kids, like, that kind of transferred over. And one thing I've noticed is, like, just pausing is so powerful. And when something happens that before would have just set me off, both in my own head of it's always going to be this way and my kid's always going to spill cereal and it's always going to be messy, or whatever the suffering of the day was, and then to just know this is what it's like right now, and I'm just going to pause and we can clean up the cereal without making it into a big story. I mean, that has just been huge for me, being able to pause. And as my kids get older, I think it's so powerful for us as parents, as well as teachers, to then model that for our kids. Like, okay, I'm just going to take a deep breath right now before I respond to this, so that they see us modeling, how we respond to things. So that's been huge for me. It's decreased a lot of the yelling and the fighting and kind of those power struggles that are just so exhausting in parenting. So that's been huge for me.
Awesome.
Yeah, just that.
It's huge. I mean, just that reactivity. Yeah. No, it's like so big to be able to take even small steps, even maybe 1 out of every 5 steps away from that reactivity. You know what I mean? It's just, it makes a huge, huge difference in the quality of our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I notice, and I tell this story a lot in my trainings, this was several years ago. We were getting ready for school in the morning and my daughter was super mad that I asked her to put her socks on because, God forbid. And so just went off and she's yelling and screaming at me. And then it comes out, you're the worst mom in the world. And, we've all, that is just like the trigger, right? And you just want to like, oh my gosh, your head's like, oh, really? I'm just getting going. Like, are you like, oh yeah, I've only done X, Y, and Z for you, but I'm the worst mom in the world. Like, you can think of all these completely unskillful responses and they're just going to lead to a battle. None of it's going to result in socks getting put on. And so I did my mindful breathing and okay, how am I going to respond? How am I going to respond? And I still didn't know. And then my daughter says, well, you're not the worst mom in the world. I'm just mad at you right now. I was like, okay, like we can work with that. Like we can work with anger, but the fact that I took a pause, it gave her the chance to pause And I think, our kids, it's just these big emotions in little bodies, and they don't, I truly believe they don't want to misbehave. She knows she's not supposed to yell that at me without me having to lecture her. And when I pause, she can pause, like, okay, I'm just mad at you. And, then it just de-escalates so much. I think, yes, mindfulness is so powerful for us as individuals and for our own self-care and self-development, but it has such a big impact on the people around us, and again, the research shows in the classroom, if teachers are practicing mindfulness, it has an impact on the kids, even if they're not teaching it to the kids. So I think that's something that I can see in my kids as well, that they're not learning just from observation that, when you get angry, you yell and freak out,
Yeah. And that's huge. Just her own self-awareness to say, I'm mad, to just take a moment to label her feelings.
Absolutely.
That's a huge de-escalator, and that's a big step for a little kid.
Yep. Yeah. And one question that's been so powerful for me, and again, it's something we talked about in my mindful schools training, but I think it's very helpful in the classroom, but incredibly helpful with my own children, is that question, what do you need? And I don't think we ask kids that question nearly enough. What do you need? And they may not know what they need, but I think when we keep asking that question, it helps them kind of like, oh yeah, what do I need? Their tantrum is just, someone shared, wish I could remember who shared this on Facebook, but basically it was just saying, like, a kid having a tantrum is basically saying, I need help in the most ugly way possible. And can we see like the underlying message as opposed to the tantrum? So again, similar situation with my daughter screaming, and, I'm like, sweetheart, what do you need? She's like, I don't know. And then a few days later, I ask her, I'm like, what do you need? She's like, I need a trip to Florida. And then finally I said, again, it's always kind of the getting ready in the morning. I'm like, what do you need? And finally, she was probably only 7 at the time. She just said, you know what? She's like, Daddy's schedule for getting ready is faster than mine. And when Daddy says it's time to leave, he can be ready in 5 minutes, but I need 10. Like, it was this, like, again, one of those like totally obvious things, but I was like, oh, so we just need to give her more warning of when we're going to leave. So she has time, but it took asking that question several times over several days. What do you need? And then kind of gave her a bit of that, allowed her the space. Like, what do I need right now? Oh, I need more time. I need Mom and Dad to tell me.
Oh, I
earlier
love that.
We're going to leave. It's just, there's so many places where we see it, and it's minor things, but it's those minor things that drive us batty,
Yeah. I love that. I love that question, because it really is, you're pointing them to see, to look at problems and conflicts, not as like, us against them and you against me, but like someone's needs aren't being met. And that's what's causing the problem. That's kind of always what's causing a problem, is that we have different needs in this moment, right? And to just point her awareness to that, even if she can't answer and she thinks it's a trip to Florida at first, right? Yeah. It's like, it's helping her think in this way. And what a huge gift. Imagine if all the children growing up, if we all growing up thinking like, what am I needing right now? Oh, the things we, the problems we could have bypassed. That's wonderful. I really love that question. That's great, because the conflicts are generally like, we want to look at what are the needs underneath what is going on here. What are you actually needing in that moment? Oh, that's great. And so you blog really wonderfully about your experiences with mindfulness and with your kids. And I love, I read one of them where you posted about a rough night where you were wanting to bring your daughter to dance class and she did not want to go.
Oh, yes.
And so you are like teaching mindfulness, and so you're like wanting to give her like the mind jar and wanting her to take deep breaths and like doing all these things. So tell us the story about what happened.
Yeah, it was funny. Well, and kind of what had prompted, I think, that post too was I was meeting with a doctor, and she was asking, like, how's your daughter doing? And I was like, well, I think she could use a little mindfulness or something like that. And the doctor's like, yeah, or just send her to run around the block. And I was like, oh yeah, haha. And but then so we're having this conversation in the car, and how she's all furious about having to go to dance, and then on the way home, she was in a much better mood. Like, she had fun at dance class and enjoyed it. And so I just kind of made a comment about how much happier she seemed. And I think she made a comment, this was a couple of years ago, about how, she really likes exercise and it really helps her to move. And it was just one of those like, duh moments of like, I calm down by breathing, and she calms down by running and moving. And so for her, so anyway, so the two of us, then we kind of brainstorm, like, what are some ways that when you get frustrated and mommy thinks you need to breathe, what are some other things you could do? And she's like, I could go ride my bike. She's like, I could go hula hoop. I could go up in my room. Now it's kind of funny because she loves dance. And so I think I can actually hear her right now. She's got the music going upstairs and she's just dancing in her room. But that was her way of decompressing. And so again, it was I think I titled that post, it was like the totally obvious thing a mindful mama overlooked. Like it was so obvious. Like, of course we don't all calm down in the same ways. And so I think it was really eye-opening too, that we give kids the opportunity to explore, like, what are the things that help you? When I teach mindfulness, and I do most of the work I do with kids is with high school kids. So they're a little bit older, and you can kind of, the language you use is a little bit different. But so I'll tell the high school kids is just, think of this as a series of experiments. And I'm going to teach you so many different mindful practices. And we're going to do mindful breathing, and we'll do mindful walking, and we'll do loving kindness practices, and we'll do some, just some simple yoga poses, or we'll do this. And I just don't take what's going to work for you. I just ask them, I'm like, try everything at least once. It's like your vegetables, like try them a few times. And then if they don't work, we'll be done. But it's about finding those practices that are going to help you. And it always surprises me, the things that kids really, really enjoy. I taught, doing loving kindness, especially with high school kids, can be really awkward because they're just, they're like, this is so cheesy to send love to my mom and, or to myself, but I do it. And we bring some humor into it, but I'm like, let's just try it. And, at the end of our 8-week class, a couple of the girls said, like, that was the practice that was most helpful for them. And that when they were feeling anxious, if they could just sit down, and it was so adorable. She's like, I just sit down and I send loving thoughts to my mom and I feel so much better. It's like, oh, you were the cutest thing. But it's like that practice really resonated with her. And, mindful walking is another practice that can be, it's awkward to do with adults and especially with teenagers, but so many kids have told me, like, that helps me because the hallway is the hardest place for me to be. And if I can walk mindfully in the hallway, it's so much easier to deal with that stress. And so I think with all of these, whether we're kids and adults, there's the formal seated practice that we talked about, but there's so many other practices. And it's really about what's going to work for you. I think it was even in one of the Buddha scriptures, he said, try these things and see which things lead to greater ease for you, and then keep doing them. Just because loving kindness practice works for some people doesn't mean it's going to be your practice. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I love that you're teaching it with high schoolers. What a time when we really need it, right? When have so little access to sort of our prefrontal cortex, our thoughtful,
Yep.
thoughtful part of our brain, and how much suffering there is in high school. I mean, there's so much suffering. So, which kind of leads me to like, why do you think, you and I are in this place of like having found mindfulness and seeing these incredible benefits in our own life and wanting to share it with other people. And why do you think this is filling sort of, I mean, to me, it seems like it's filling such a need in the culture at large right now. And I'm wondering, do you see that as filling this need in the culture? And why do you think it is what we need so much at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see it as filling a need in the culture. I was interviewed a couple months ago by a reporter from Slate magazine about this movement of bringing mindfulness in schools. And she asked me a question that's kind of stuck with me. And the question was, are we just putting a Band-Aid over a bullet hole with this, that we have so many problems in this culture. Like maybe we need to look at why we're so stressed out in the first place, and all these pressures and things. And, and I think that's a very legitimate thing to look at. If you look at, the pressure for college, for these high school kids, I mean, they're hearing from day one of high school, they happen to be right now in this, these are kind of the baby boomers, babies. I don't know. But yeah, I'm getting my generations. But, there's really this demographic boom of kids applying to college now. I mean, it's so different for us. 20 years ago, it was kind of a baby bust and it was a lot easier to get into college. And so there's that college pressure and, they have, with social media and all of that, I mean, I think it's just intensified the drama. I mean, high school's always been drama, but I think social media kind of intensifies that and all the distractions that are available. I mean, so I think there are these big, big cultural pieces, expectations for adults on how much we're supposed to work and for families on, you have to be in this activity and this activity and, you got to pick your sport by age 5 and, all this stuff, so I think there are some big social issues that are worth looking at in terms of what's causing our stress. And that said, we still need practices to deal with this. I would use the analogy for mothers, and if we look at young mothers and, rates of postpartum depression or just isolation and, difficulties with new mothers. And it's like, yes, I agree. We need to fight for, not trying to get political here, but, better healthcare and more generous maternal leave policies and family leave. And there are those societal changes. But you know what? I need to make it to dinner tonight. I need to make it to when my husband gets home tonight. And legislation and social change is going to take a while, but I kind of need to meet things right now. Mm-hmm. And that's where I see mindfulness is in some ways a Band-Aid if we look at it and what a Band-Aid is supposed to do. Like a Band-Aid doesn't do any of the healing. It just creates a safe environment so the bacteria doesn't get in and the wound can heal. It's like we're creating that, that safe space where we can handle these stressors of the outside world. And I think in many ways, we're just not traditionally giving that to kids. I think it's changing. I can definitely say, so my last year in the classroom was just at the end of the 2015 school year. And I can definitely say in the last few years, there was much more attention being paid to student mental health. My kids, for example, in their elementary school are learning breathing and, how to recognize their emotions. And so I think we're doing more of it. But I think we're recognizing that we've just kind of always assumed that kids know what we mean when we tell them to calm down, or that they know how to pay attention, we tell them to pay attention all the time. Like, but do we ever teach them how? I think we're starting to realize like we do need to provide some of just those fundamental skills. And I think that's a really long answer
No.
to your question. Like, I mean, I think it's both just learning to deal with the human condition, which has always been hard because, as we talked about earlier, we always, our brains have always worked this way of trying to cling to the good and push away the bad, and seeing more of the negative maybe than we need to. And then that's just been kind of intensified by what we're living in today.
Yeah. I think that we don't, I guess maybe in the past, I think we had more opportunities to pause, right? Like things were slower. Like there were times where maybe we were sitting waiting for the bus, or you were sitting waiting for the cart, the horse and buggy. Like, the speed of everything and the pressure, I think these things that we think save time actually sort of rob us of time. And this pausing becomes even more of a rare and needed skill, it seems.
Yes. And I think kids can be quite uncomfortable with that. I mean, I several months ago was leading a group for high school kids. And, I sometimes close my eyes when I'm leading a guided practice because that's just natural and comfortable for me. And this was just like 4 or 5 minutes with high school kids. I mean, I don't do very long closed eye practices with high school kids, so they tend to fall asleep. And so about halfway through this guided meditation, I was talking most of the time, guiding them through staying with the breath. And I opened my eyes, and there's 2 kids across the room from each other playing rock, paper, scissors with each other. Everyone else's eyes closed meditating, and then these 2 kids are playing rock, paper, scissors. And, it was perfect. And they stopped as soon as I opened my eyes, and they were fine. They weren't disturbing anyone. But then it was a great teachable moment at the end where I just asked them, like, tell me what was going on with the rock, paper, scissors. And this boy was like, you know what? He's like, I could do that for 60 seconds. He's like, and then I needed something. Like I needed to connect with someone. I needed stimulation. And, and he's not maybe phrasing it in those words, but just recognizing like, yeah, how often do we do this? How often do we sit with no phone and no book and no person that we're talking to, no TV? How often do we just sit with ourselves? And that can be frightening sometimes. It can be, it's not just restlessness. Like sometimes a challenging thought comes up and we don't know how to deal with it. So we go to our phone or something. And so I think it's powerful to help kids in particular, but even adults, just be able to sit with themselves.
Yeah. To be with ourselves. And that's that, to bring it first full circle back to parenting. I mean, that's what, that's why it's so powerful for parenting, is like, can we be with all our own triggers and feelings that come up without all the reactiveness and the yelling and the stuff that we know from research is not helpful and maybe damaging and all those things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was Blaise Pascal, who's a 16th, 17th century philosopher, said that all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit in a room by himself.
I'm so glad you remembered that, because I was thinking of that quote and I couldn't remember who the heck it was.
Yeah, I'm pretty
so that was great.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Pascal. And I think that's, one of my teachers said in one of the retreats we were at, she's like, this is the real revolution. Like people sitting down and staying with themselves and all the stuff that's in your head. I mean, that's a pretty revolutionary act. And I think kind of coming to what you said, like, yeah, if we could all do that and know our triggers and be that self-aware, and by knowing that, kind of making ourselves safe for other people, whether our children and all the people we come into contact with. I mean, that's why, I say on my website, I'm like, I truly believe this practice can change the world. And I think that that's part of why, like when we're cultivating that awareness of how we are in the world and aware of how others are in the world, I mean, it changes things, it's so powerful.
Oh, and the ripple effects. Mommy, I was just mad. I love that. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, Sarah, I could probably take up all your time, but then your kids would be upstairs watching like hours and hours.
I know. There's a lot of mindful parenting going on right now.
Yeah, I could totally geek out with you on this stuff. But I promise I won't. And I'm so grateful that you got a chance to come on the Yoga Stories Project podcast and talk to us. It's been really, really fun. Before you go, where can people find you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I really have two main places you can find my work. So the blog is Left Brain Buddha. It's just leftbrainbuddha.com. And that's where you'll find kind of the articles about mindful parenting and that. And then I also offer programs, as obviously we talked about, in schools. And so my business website is Brilliant Mindfulness. So it's just brilliantmindfulness.com. And there you'll find the teacher programs. And there's lots of links on there to just if you're interested in learning more about bringing mindfulness into schools and doing it with kids. There's a lot of resources on that page as well.
All right. Thank you so, so much. I really, really enjoyed talking to you, Sarah.
Yes, this was super fun. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your show.
Thank you so much for listening. Didn't you love Sarah? I could have talked to her for hours. I love that question. What do you need? So, so great. Let's all just write that down and use it all the time. So, I hope you love this episode. If you loved it, please go to iTunes, leave us a review, and tell a friend about it. And also, I want to remind you that coming up in a few days, if you're listening to this when the podcast comes out, I'll be doing my mindfulness 10-day challenge for parents, and you can go to hunteryoga.com/challenge to sign up, and it's a free challenge to help you get your own mindfulness practice started. So thank you to William Fields for the music, and have a wonderful, wonderful week, my friend. I thank you so, so much for listening, and I wish you all the best. Namaste.